and for anyone interested in participating with the graphical abstracts competition. Zoe, would you mind enabling screen sharing? I wanted to show off the website page. Here's the link for everyone. Okay. So for anyone who is competing in the competition, I just wanted to call y'all's attention to our website page. Everything to do with the competition can be found here. And as a reminder, the deadline is February 21st, and the actual competition with presentations will happen 4 weeks from now on February 23rd. Anyone can participate, anyone affiliated with UCLA or doing brain-related research, but only students are eligible to enter the competition and possibly receive the first prize of $100. So if anyone wants to practice their graphical abstract presentation skills, you're welcome to participate. All right, Zoe, you want to take it away?
Sure. So I'm super excited today. We're going to be talking about breaking in to science writing, and we have 3 great panelists who have agreed to come speak with us today. I think we can just, I'm actually not going to really give an introduction because I think for a few minutes, each person can just talk about themselves and a little bit about their background and kind of how they broke into science writing. And we have all different types, which is great. And then we can just go into kind of an open discussion Q&A. I'm sure there's lots of questions for you guys, so that'll be good. We can just go in order of my screen. Caitlin, would you want to start?
Yeah, absolutely. Do you know if I have screen sharing currently?
Yeah, it should be enabled.
Okay, I only have one monitor, so hopefully this will go well. Okay, this looks good. Can everyone can see, right? Okay, perfect. Thank you all for inviting me. My name is Caitlin Aamodt. I am sort of in purgatory right now between finishing my PhD on filing fee and starting my postdoc at UCSD. But I was in the NSIDP and in Stephanie White's lab for my graduate career. And I thought it would be fun to kind of frame my story of my SciComm experience as opportunities that I encountered more so than like accomplishments that I did, because I really had no clue at the beginning of grad school what was out there and what kinds of things might come up. So today I'm just going to share a little bit of that with you. But before I get into it, I just want to say that anyone can be a science writer, but especially at this stage. So if you have any like doubts, like, well, you know, like, will my writing be good enough? You know, anything like that, I say just go for it because that's what an editor is for. And with the blog Knowing Neurons, we've published all kinds of things, and hopefully through this talk, you'll be able to see how you can parlay smaller blog posts into bigger blog posts and get paid sometimes. So hopefully this will be interesting. My first blog post was actually an activism piece that I wrote in support of animal research. So that's one genre that is interesting to consider. This was for Speaking of Research, which supports animal research. And that was the first time I was motivated to do this kind of blogging. But it's actually come full circle in a way because my most recent pitch that I'm working on now is going to be for 538. and it's a reanalysis of criminal justice statistics looking at disability and race in incarcerated populations. So that can be something really interesting and motivating to think about using your writing for activism. Another opportunity that you can look for as a grad student is writing for vendor blogs. And these usually will pay. I think I got a $60 Amazon gift card for this one, which is for the brand Zymo. And basically, they're just looking for content for their blogs that they use to promote their brand. So it's not really like SpawnCon in the sense that like sponsored content. So you don't have to write like an ad hidden in a blog post or anything like that. But that's just one way to get like an extra 50, 60 bucks here or there. And there are other vendors that have similar blogs like this. I coined this term because I couldn't think of a good term for smaller blogs that are adorable and have a following, but that's what I would consider the blog Knowing Neurons. This was the first blog, really the only blog actually, that I ever served as both a writer and a contributing editor. Knowing Neurons is always looking for good people, so if you are thinking about doing some science writing, it's a great experience. You get quality editing and you get a really cute graphic to go with your piece. So it is a great blog and I highly recommend it. And so probably my most popular piece that I did with Knowing Neurons was on the Mandela effect, which is this idea that, for anyone who's not familiar, that there are a large number of people who remember Nelson Mandela dying in prison, and that this must indicate that there are two parallel universe timelines that somehow got crossed, and that is why some people are from one timeline, some people are from another timeline, and that can be the only explanation. So I decided to challenge that and write a piece on it, and it was very well received because it sort of hits a couple of hot topics, you know, neuroscience and quantum physics / mysticism. So it was a fun piece to write, and it was definitely my most popular one so far. One of the other perks of blogging for Knowing Neurons is that we have a lot of connections to some blogs that get a lot more views and publicity. So it can be a really good opportunity to establish connections with some of the bigger blogs. One of them is Aeon, which doesn't pay for shorter pieces, but they have longer pieces called essays that they do pay pretty well for. And I know one of my colleagues who started at Knowing Neurons, Joe Froelich, has parlayed his connections through Knowing Neurons into getting paid to write pieces there. And when you do make a connection with a blog like this, you get connected with an editor. And then in the future, if you say, hey, like, I have a pitch, they know who you are and they care and they want to listen to what you have to say. And sometimes they even reach out to you and say, hey, do you have anything you can pitch me right now? So that's one of the perks. I know there's a lot of jokes about like exposure and you know, that kind of thing, but it actually is sort of a easy way to establish yourself in science writing, I think. This one also got picked up by Discover, so that was cool. That's probably one of my more flashy bylines. And so then also some of the really unexpected opportunities that came up were doing interviews about the Mandela effect. One that was really exciting was I was invited to be interviewed for The Digital Human, which is a podcast from BBC Radio 4 and or like a vlog and a podcast. And I was really interested in doing it. They actually wanted to fly me out there, but SFN was coming up and I had to work on that instead. So, but I did do an interview in LA at a recording studio, but the connection was really bad and they didn't end up getting anything usable. So that didn't really work out. But I was also like super nervous. So like I wish I had known this kind of thing might be something that would happen, because I would have tried to be less nervous. So I guess don't be blindsided if you get a cool opportunity. Another interview I did was with the creators of this card game, Greg Young and Sherry Spyro. And that one went pretty well, but I don't know if they're going to do anything with it. But that's just sort of a fun, random opportunity that I had. Another opportunity that I've gotten through knowing Neurons is to interview for consulting for television. In this case, the show Mindfield on YouTube. They did not end up hiring me, I think in part because they were looking for a pretty big time commitment. And if you do want to make your whole career science writing, I would encourage you to like really go for these kinds of opportunities. I'm still sort of chasing the dragon of having my own lab one day. So for me, like it was really important for me to prioritize sort of those sorts of academic things, but science writing full-time is a totally valid career path. And if that's where you're going, like definitely like really go for these kinds of opportunities. Oh, and then technical editing is another opportunity that I've done. It's basically just reading through somebody else's science writing and checking to make sure it's valid. I got a lot of experience doing this for Knowing Neurons as a contributing editor. And then I got paid to do it for this author, Sarah Zabel. I actually don't know how to pronounce her name, but she's writing a book on depression. So that's another way that you can make a little bit of money here or there with this kind of work. So I don't know how I'm doing on time. I also have some YouTube comments and fan mail that I don't want to go over.
I think it's fine if you want to talk a little more. I mean, we're not very strict on time.
Okay, well this will be quick, but just as a fun bonus, sometimes you get interaction from fans or people interested in critiquing your work. And so for fun, I threw that in at the end of the PowerPoint. Some of the highlights. Your video presentation here will cause harm on those seeking real answers to all this, by the way. Like why Jesus is called a gay, drunk, murdering killer now. Look it up if you really want to know the who and why of this. And I hope I have helped you see how you're way out of line with this lame, uninformed, ignorant guess you've made. Can you please do a follow-up video next year and do an informative about this phenomenon? We see on occasion, even when someone even does a half-assed effort to investigate what this all is, which you obviously did not. I suggest you find one that does see the effects and one that does not see the effects clearly, but both know what M effect is, and then do a follow-up video. My guess is you won't. You just in it for the attention, huh? And then I also have gotten a lot of mail from people who want to share with me their particular hypotheses on what could be the cause of the Mandela effect. And so that's been fun. But then on the other hand, I've also gotten a lot of outreach from, for whatever reason, middle school girls. Middle school girls are very excited about this. So that's been nice. And even if you are going the academic route, I know sometimes people will kind of make you feel guilty for spending time doing science writing instead of just spending 100% of your time 24/7 working on your lab stuff. But science writing is outreach, and it's important. It's important to like take time away from your research and then to come back with like a more refreshed, you know, view on it. And you can absolutely put it on your CV. You can put it in like fellowship proposals, so for applications. So I think science writing is a great thing to do, and I would encourage everyone to do it at, you know, whatever level of time investment you're interested in doing it. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Caitlin. That was really fascinating. I'm gonna follow Zoe's example and do who is next in my screen. So Stephanie, would you like to share next?
Yeah, I can definitely share. That was really great, Caitlin. I feel like I learned a lot of stuff too. But yeah, so hi, my name is Stephanie. I am a postdoc in Alyssa Hallam's lab at UCLA. And I actually also did my PhD at UCLA. I was in Kent Hill's lab and we studied this parasite called trypanosomes and how they communicate with other parasites. And I didn't prepare slides, but I can share a couple of resources that have sort of helped me in my science writing journey. So I can share a little bit of that. Let's see. Okay, cool. Everybody see my screen?
Yep.
Okay, cool, awesome. So I first sort of got my start at science writing here at UCLA. There was a science communication group started by a couple of grad students. I don't think it's active anymore, but out of that group formed this magazine called Signal to Noise magazine. And it was run by grad students and postdocs. And what we really wanted to do was have a way for grad students and like early career trainees who wanted to do more science communication, science writing, but didn't really have an outlet. And so we created this magazine for grad students and postdocs, and basically as a way for to bring the science like from the lab bench, directly from the people doing the research out to the public in a way that everyone can understand. So yeah, so I started off as a staff writer for Signal to Noise. You can see this is some of our recent articles. But yeah, and then a year after that, I became editor-in-chief. And so basically you would write an article and then someone on staff will edit it. And we do lots of like peer editing. And yeah, basically it's a really easy way to start getting a sense of if you even like science writing, like what does an article look like, and sort of how do you go about actually writing one and getting science to the public. And so this was how I started in science writing. And so from here, I had a friend in a neighboring lab who knew I was really interested in science writing and wanted to do a bit more. And he had started working for an epigenetics company and said like, oh, we have a blog that's not about like products, but sort of like Caitlin said, it's more about like to get people to learn more about the subject, in this case, also epigenetics. And so I ended up writing sort of a story about a new epigenetics paper that came out. And so I would write weekly stories for that blog. And that was a really great way for me to sort of get some more clips and get some more of my writing out there. And it was also really nice because I got paid a little bit. And that was like my first time getting paid for writing, which it feels really cool. But yeah, and so from there, I then applied for the AAAS Mass Media Fellowship. And so if you don't know what that is, let's see, I think it's on this tab. Yeah. So this is a 10-week fellowship that's put on by AAAS, and basically they send STEM grad students and postdocs to media outlets around the country for a 10-week internship, basically. And so you first go to DC for like 3 days and do a sort of journalism boot camp, learn how to write a story from all the really great like science news editors at the magazine or at the publication Science. And from there, you go to your media outlet and you spend 10 weeks writing for that outlet. So for me, I was at the Los Angeles Times, which was really cool because I'm an LA native. And so I got to write for like our paper, which is amazing. But yeah, and you work with an editor there. And so I wrote news stories, sort of longer feature stories, some explainers. And so I got a really great opportunity to sort of just write lots of different stories in like a real journalism setting. And yeah, it was fantastic. And so I'm really happy to answer more questions about this fellowship. And I highly encourage you to apply if you're at all interested, because it's a great way to sort of get into science journalism and see if you really like it. And also, you get a lot of really great clips. You get to say that like, oh, I wrote for the Los Angeles Times, I wrote for Discover, National Geographic. They have a lot of great sort of media outlets that they partner with. So I would definitely encourage you to check this out if you're at all interested. And I think, let's see, this one was one of the stories that I wrote that I really enjoyed. It was about doctors who are writing poetry. And it was cool. It actually came out sort of near the beginning of COVID. And so I re-interviewed a lot of the doctors about how they were dealing with COVID patients and how that affected their poetry. And it was one of my favorites, I think, to write. Not strictly a science story, but there was some science in there. But yeah, and so since the fellowship, I did the fellowship in 2019. I've now been doing my postdoc, but also doing more freelance writing on the side. And so I've written for Quantum magazine, and here's one of my stories for them. They wanted a computer science story, and it's not my like forte, but I was able to do the research and interview a lot of people, and it was actually really fun to write. And yeah, and then I've got another one hopefully coming out in Discover magazine pretty soon. I think it's going through fact checking right now. But yeah, and besides the sort of journalism, that journalism type writing that I do, I've also done a little bit of sort of like brand work, I guess you could say, where I've written for a company that does like organ on chip stuff. I've written a couple blogs for them. And I've also written some sort of like customer stories, I think they're called, for another company that does, it helps labs order like lab supplies. So I've sort of talked to the companies and how they liked the product and then written up a little story about them. But yeah, so just like Caitlin said, there's lots of different science writing you can do. You can do straight journalism, you could do more like marketing type stuff, or there's even a lot of, you can write for like universities. Every university has a press office. And so when you do like scientific research and then you publish it in a journal, if it's like a really exciting study, sometimes you'll have a press release that goes along with it. And so that's what the university press office is for. They'll interview you and the researchers and then write up a little press release and send that to the media. So you can also do some science writing if you like volunteer for the press office or ask if you can help out there. So that's another sort of career path in science writing. But yeah, so I think that was a lot, but if you have any questions about any of that, I'm super thrilled to answer them. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. I think we'll have some questions later about the AAAS Fellowship for sure. Next, we have Gwen. Would you like to go?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I am Gwen. I am a current graduate student in the psychology department. And I love science communication in a very broad sense. So I've done things not just in science writing, but outreach events with like the Explore Your Universe event that UCLA holds every year, and some small events that different graduate student groups put on in schools and things like that. And science writing is like one of those pieces that I really like. And it's one of those pieces where, you know, what you write and you put on the internet, it stays there a lot longer than a small interaction. So it's kind of something that has longevity, which is nice. And I got into this, I wrote my first blog actually really related to the research I was doing. So just very briefly, my research is developmental psychology, and I do language development research with children. So I work with preschool children. And especially before the pandemic, but even now, I interact with a lot of parents and preschool teachers, and they are all very, you know, concerned about the child's development. And so when they have someone who is, you know, becoming an expert in child development, they want to ask me all of these questions. And some of the questions I got were, you know, they were really worried because, you know, language development is one of those things that's very obvious to people because you want to communicate with the kid and figure out what's going on. And so if they can talk to you, or if they're having trouble talking to you, it's really obvious right away. And so they were worried, you know, asking me questions about, you know, is my child delayed? And like compared to their sibling, they're doing this or that or the other thing. And that's really like getting all of those questions over and over again. You know, I would do my best to answer their questions. I would do my best to give them the information that I had. But I realized, you know, like I do have this information. Like I know your child, you know, is more likely than not just within the range of, you know, what's normative development for kids. And so that's kind of where I went with my first writing piece, was because I was like, well, obviously this needs to be out there. This, you know, this information is not getting to the people who need it, which is really what kind of drove me to do science writing, was to get the information to people who want it or need it. And I'm not going to share slides or anything, but I put in the chat there the blog that I primarily write for, just in case you want to check it out. And so, you know, since then, you know, I did my first piece on something that was like really personal and related to my research, you know, I've written a bunch and I've really kind of expanded on what I write about, mostly for Psych in Action, that blog that's in the chat there. You know, sometimes I highlight a particular study or scientist, or sometimes I'm discussing a trend in the field, like open science is really hitting psychology. In the past few years, people are getting really into it. So I talked about it in terms of developmental psychology and the particular difficulties and things that we can and cannot do with developmental psych with open science. Sometimes I'm making an argument. So I wrote for the CogSci, Cognitive Science Society. They have a blog. So I had told, you know, other cognitive scientists why you should care about categorization and cognition, and why it's important for everyone in that field to know about. So sometimes I'll make an argument like that. But pretty generally, I think I'll just end on why I think it's really important to do this kind of stuff, because I mean, you know, the pandemic is one thing, and that's kind of like a really obvious reason now that we need people to understand the science, the broad public to understand the science. But I think, you know, even if you're not writing about the coronavirus, you know, it's important to get science out of the ivory tower, because the point of science is not just so that our little group can talk about it, you know, it's so that everyone can understand more about their world. And also communicating the science is part of the piece that builds trust in scientists, which has downstream effects of impacting how people view things when experts are saying, hey, take the vaccine, right? And so the more science communication we do, I think the more the public can trust and understand science. And even basic science, because I've talked to other graduate students who want to write for the Psych in Action blog, but aren't quite sure what they want to do or whether it would be interesting to talk about X, Y, or Z. I think even, you know, people have this kind of assumption that this kind of applied science is what people really want to hear when you're like giving actual recommendations to teachers, or, you know, when this intervention for depression really worked or something. But I mean, even basic science, you know, the first blog post I wrote was very basic, just this is the range of normal for child development in language, you know, because parents are curious. They really want to know. I can tell you that for sure. They really want to know, and the teachers are really worried about it. And I think that is a nice way in, you know, and once they get like something that they're like really concerned about, then they're more curious about other parts of science, and they'll go in and read more about it. I think that trust building piece is just really what keeps me doing it, you know, that, and I quite like writing. I think that's it. So yeah, I'm happy to answer questions about any of this that you all are curious about. I also have just applied to the AAAS Mass Media Fellowship, so cross your fingers for me. Yes, Stephanie was a big help there, so definitely ask her any questions. She helped me think about the application in a really good way.
Thank you so much, Gwen. It was awesome to hear all of y'all's experiences with science writing. And to start off the Q&A session, I actually have a question for Stephanie and Gwen about the AAAS Mass Media Fellowship. Is that open to just grad students or just postdocs or both?
No, it's actually open to, I think, even advanced undergrads, like I think senior year maybe, and all grad students like master's, PhD, anything, and also postdoc. So I think they broadened the eligibility criteria now. Yeah. So definitely apply. It's great.
Does anyone have some questions?
Yeah, I would love to ask, I guess, like generally for everyone about, yeah, I guess in terms of skill building. So I'm sure a lot of it does come from the experience, and then these, I guess, like more structured opportunities like the fellowship. But I'm wondering, maybe like prior to that or along the way, what else you found was helpful in terms of learning how to write succinctly or persuasively. I know that like I tend to like get swept up in like issues that I'm writing about, and like it gets hard for me to zoom out, and I'm sure that's something that's quite common as well. So yeah, I was just hoping to hear, I guess, from all of you about how, yeah, you contribute, I guess, to your own like writing development.
Yeah, I could talk about this briefly. So I know there's lots of workshops and things like that that are more structured to help you kind of refine your science writing skills. But one of the things that I just did on my own that I thought was really helpful, you know, when you're writing a journal article, they say, read a lot of journal articles and see how they're phrasing it and that kind of thing. So I did the same sort of thing. I just applied those techniques to this science writing where, like when I was writing for the APS student notebook, I went and read through a bunch of their articles just to see what is their structure like, you know, because like I know vaguely what the audience is going to be, you know, for that one. And so that was, you know, that's the first piece that you need, but now how do they generally like to structure it? And that was really important. I don't go so far as to like reverse outline articles and things like that I'll do for journal articles. So it's not super in depth, but it is, you know, one of those things that I think you've probably heard the advice before. If you want to write better, read more, right? And so reading a wide variety of things, like when I applied for the Mass Media Fellowship, I read a lot of articles through the LA Times and NPR and things like that, you know, because one of the pieces of the application is you write a new news story for them. Based on some recent article. And so I went and I read through a lot of articles to just see how they were doing it.
Thanks so much.
I can also jump in.
Oh yeah, you can go ahead.
Okay, cool. I would also say, in addition to what Gwen said, because that's really good, definitely have someone else read your writing. And it can be about like anything, whatever you're interested in writing about. Just having another set of eyes is super helpful. They'll catch little things like, oh, you used a super technical term, like you should define this in the next sentence. Like that sort of stuff is really, really helpful, I would say.
Yeah, definitely err on the side of explaining too much, and then anything that's bulk can be cut later. I would also say, I guess, a couple of points. One is not to be like so critical of yourself that you don't submit things that are probably actually good, because they're going to get edited anyway. Other people are going to, you know, editors are probably going to change things a little bit. So that's, I've always felt insecure when I send something and then they're like, oh, this is great. And it's like, oh, okay, cool. And then the other piece of advice that I always think about with like any presentation is to focus on why we care or why it's cool and not just how it works. But yeah, I think all of that's great advice.
Thank you.
I have a question. First of all, this is so helpful. Thank you so much. All three of you. It's really great. I was wondering about, So like when I've tried writing, I find that there's, you know, people always talk also in policy about how like in science articles, you know, it's like the triangle versus the reverse triangle type thing, where it's like starting from the big idea and going down versus, versus like the details and like leading up to the big idea. So I was wondering if the three of you have any opinions on, or just like your experience in what what was the most surprising thing that was so different between scientific writing and blog posts or journal articles or whatever other types of writing you've done.
Yeah, I, you know, had it drilled in me from undergrad through now that in science writing for journal articles, you have to write very kind of dry. You know, you want to get the idea out there and be very kind of, you know, you want to explain it really well, but you are just giving them the science. And I think something that was tricky to learn, but also kind of fun to learn, was how to now make it into something that is kind of, I don't know if eye-catching is the right term, but like something that is more like a story, right? And so that can be in a bunch of different ways. So I've written something where I interview one of the authors on the paper, and so I make it more about the author rather than about the story or the research. So the research piece is still there, but or I make it more of like so I started one article with like a bunch of quotes from parents, and like, so these are like the kinds of things that people are talking about, and so now let me address those concerns directly, or just making it, you know, framing it in different ways that's much more kind of like almost like fiction writing, but you're then bringing it back to the science. And it was, you know, when I first started, I was like, oh, this is just like, you know, simplifying my language and making it, you know, connecting it to the reader. But it felt like a whole different kind of writing that I was learning, which I guess it kind of is. But it was surprising to me how different it felt when I was writing it, if that makes sense. Yeah.
I had a question. So it seems that in the past few years, that sort of previously accepted scientific truths are being questioned, and there's a lot more sort of distrust or suspicion towards science. So I was curious about whether that has sort of affected your approach or your strategy when you kind of try to disseminate these ideas, and do you sort of take that into account?
I think it just makes me more motivated to do science writing because, you know, those people can be really loud, but there are also a lot of people who really want to read good science writing and really care about being informed. And so I would say it's more motivating for me. I wouldn't say that I'm like writing for those people specifically as much as just like anybody who's curious and wants to know. But I think you're right. You know, like I ended up networking with Jason Shepard, who's a scientist I really admire. And for that reason, we were talking about, he was like, I commend you for doing science writing because it's such a time, you know, in our society. And so I think it can be a cause that brings scientists and science writers together in a really positive way. Yeah, that's my 2 cents.
I also had a quick question for you guys. This is kind of to all three of you. So it sounds like obviously all three of you have been doing science writing as you've had either like a postdoc mentor or a PhD mentor. And usually I would think that science writing falls outside of the usual, like the classic academia career path and stuff like that. And so I was curious what your experiences were in terms of support or lack thereof that you received from your mentors and whether that helped or hindered you. Yeah.
That's a good question. I feel like it sort of depends on your mentor. Like for my PhD mentor, he was very hands-off. And so he would be like, oh, I didn't know you were doing this cool science thing, like science writing thing. Like, oh, wow, that's neat. And I feel like as long as it didn't get in the way of like my lab work and I was still like accomplishing everything I was going to do, he was totally fine with it. And I think, yeah, Alyssa, my postdoc mentor, is pretty much the same way. She's like, oh, wow, you're still doing that freelance science writing? Like, yeah. And so as long as, yeah, I feel like I don't let it get in the way of like my lab work. Like when I'm doing lab, I'm doing lab. But like when I have some time in the evenings or like on the weekends, that's when I do like the bulk of my freelance like science writing stuff. So yeah, so in my case, my like PIs have been pretty supportive. Yeah. So it's been pretty positive for me, but I know some PIs can be less so. So it does depend on the person, I think.
Yeah, I would definitely echo what Stephanie just said. The first thing I did that was kind of not directly geared towards the academic path in grad school wasn't science writing. It was, with a different student group during outreach to high schools and stuff. And when I told my PI that, I joined this group, UGSB, we're going to go do these kinds of things. And she gave me this piece of advice that really kind of showed me where she was coming from. She was like, that's fine, but think about that as that's what you're doing in your free time. So you're spending, your job is to do this, your research and teaching. And so in your free time, you can do whatever you want. If that's what you want to do with your free time, that's fine. And so I've kind of treated it from there, that as long as that's, I'm getting my work done, like Stephanie said, I've never had a problem with that with her. So as long as that continues, she's fine if I talk about it, but she's not terribly curious about it because that's definitely not what she did and not what she's advising me on. So it's just kind of like, that's a separate thing. So it's just kind of separated. So in a sense, I would say that was pretty supportive compared to some stories I've heard. So yeah, I think it's a good way to think about it too, because you are grad students, I think most of you, all of you. And so, you do want to get your work done, but yeah, there's always time for this, I think.
Yeah, I would pretty much echo that and just say, like, don't be discouraged if your PI isn't enthusiastically supportive, because science writing, I really do believe that being a better writer helps with publications, with fellowship applications, and that it, like realistically, we're not all going to become tenure track PIs. And I know a lot of my friends have become medical liaisons. It's a great experience for that career path. Obviously, scientific publishing, popular press, like there's tons of jobs out there. So I think it's important to just like know personally that you're doing what's right for you, even if everyone isn't like a fan of what you're doing.
Gwen, I thought your comment about your PI was very interesting. How your PI said that work is work and this is kind of extra. And I definitely understand where she's coming from when you're writing something that's about something that's not related to lab work. But I'm curious if you three have met people who consider science communicating their research to be an integral part of how they approach science, because that seems to me to be increasingly important in this day and age. So I don't know, is that an opinion that you come across very often?
Not terribly often, but I have come across it. And actually, at a lot of different levels, so there are the grad students like us and postdocs who really do think it's like a really important part. Like I consider it to be, almost part of my duty as a scientist to be able to talk to people about science. Like I need to be able to do this, to be able to say that I actually understand what I'm doing, right? So if you can explain it to an 8-year-old, you know your stuff, right? But I've heard, so a friend of mine just got a postdoc with Professor Lisa Feldman Barrett, and she has multiple grants that are specifically geared towards science communication. So, she's the former president of the APS, which is our, psychology's big thing. And she, puts a lot of effort into this. So, I mean, I think it's out there. I do think, at multiple levels, like she gets large amounts of funding to do this kind of thing. part of it is science writing, but most of it is like, in museums and schools and that kind of thing. So I think it's there. And I think it is getting more popular as time goes on because people are starting to see the need for it a lot more than before. So I do say like, no, it's not terribly common that I come across that, but I do think it's getting there. So I don't mean to discourage you when I say that. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with Gwen. And I've also noticed, like, if you are on Twitter and like follow a bunch of SciComm people, I've noticed a lot more like professors and like PI level people doing a lot more SciComm than like they have in the past. So yeah, I think it's definitely, it might not be super popular, but I think it's definitely increasing in popularity.
Yeah, and it is something that I know the NSF looks for in their grant applications. So science communication and outreach in a general sense is something that they actually do have built into a lot of their like grant applications. Like we want to see that you can do this. That's not the case for every funding agency, but it does exist. It is there.
Yeah, I know that to be true for the NIH too. Part of the application is how will you disseminate these results? And they're interested in popular press as well as like a traditional publication.
Thank you guys. That's a very encouraging trend.
If no one else has a question, I guess I'm curious as to how you got into this, I guess like in the first place. Were your undergrad degrees geared towards this at all? Or was this something that you discovered in grad school or had always been keen on writing? How did that happen?
For me, I feel like I got into it in grad school because I think I was in the lab and I didn't really see myself as becoming like going the academic route. And I was like, I don't know if I want to do industry. And then I found this SciComm group and I was like, oh, like this is cool. Like I love like talking about science, explaining science, like doing outreach. Like I was like, okay, like I feel like I found like my people. Like this is something that I really enjoy. And so it was sort of within that group that I was like, okay, let's try like writing because I've always kind of liked writing, but I haven't really done too much. And so that's where like when I joined Signal to Noise and I got actual experience like doing the writing, I realized that I really enjoyed it and like really liked sort of talking to scientists and figuring out like the story behind their research. Okay, like you found this result, but like did anything fun happen in the lab when you were doing that? Or like, why is this result like really important? Like why should other people care. And so I found that I really liked it. And I guess I just sort of stumbled into it in grad school. But yeah, so that was me.
Yeah, I also got into it in grad school. I didn't even, as an undergrad, know that it was so much of a thing. And so when I got into grad school, the psych department the grad students in the psych department run Psych in Action. And to be quite honest with you, they pestered me for years to try and write something for them because, a lot of the people who run it are in my area, so developmental psych. So they were my friends coming to my office saying, hey, Gwen, you should write something for this, and I was like, oh, but, I have classwork, I've got I got to do my research and, how am I supposed to fit that in, my advisor wasn't exactly pushing me to do it. And so I didn't do it for a while. I think I only published my first one at the end of my second year or something like that. It took a minute. But once I did the first article, I was like, oh, this is fun, because I enjoyed the whole outreach aspect of things where, you go to schools and you talk to kids about this and you do these fun events. And I'm like, oh yeah, this is a way you could do that too. And I could write a full argument. It's not just like explaining one experiment to a kid. It's like a full length thing that I could make a whole argument on and put it out there. I could send it to my mom, say, hey mom, I can promise you I'm doing something here. And so it was, yeah, it took a minute to get into it, but I am so happy they persisted in pestering me because I'm really excited to be doing this. Every time I write a new article, I'm just like, oh my God, then I have to, go tell my partner all about it. And, now I'm, applying for the fellowships and thinking about a career in it and all of that. So thank goodness for Stacy Shaw. Thank you.
Yeah, I would just add, like a writer is somebody who writes. So if you write, you are a writer. I think there can be like this mystique around like the writer identity, and like I would just throw that out the window, because if you wanted to write something, I'm sure it would be good, and I'm sure it would have a home. So yeah.
Thanks,
I have a
everyone.
question. How do you, this is something that makes me nervous when I'm writing about science. How do you keep the balance between simplifying the content so that a person without a science background can understand, but also keep it detailed enough so that it is still like accurate and there is like a good amount of knowledge in there? Like, how do you, yeah, what is your strategy for that?
I feel like it's always hard. It's a hard balance to do, and then you get better with more practice. But I feel like, yeah, I always keep in mind like my audience, like what is the sort of background, like base of knowledge that they have. Because I always think about like when I was writing for the LA Times, like, okay, I'm not writing for scientists, but I'm writing for like a generally like well-educated person who like probably took a biology class in high school, and that's maybe the last time they've had science. So they know some things, but they're not going to know like everything. And so, yeah, I would start there, like think about your audience. And then if you like find you need to use like a certain technical term, then just like define it and maybe explain, like definitely use like simile, metaphor, that sort of thing. And then let's see, I try to think, yeah, it's always a balancing act, I guess, is the best way to put it. But yeah, you just try not to be too technical, but like just give them enough information that like they'll still understand like the general process that you're trying to explain, I would say.
Yeah, I definitely agree with everything Stephanie just said. I would just add that like when you're thinking about your audience, think about what they are coming to your article for, and then pick, like if you're going through one recently published paper or something like that, pick out the piece. So if there's like 4 experiments and each experiment has multiple different measures, you know, you don't have to explain every single piece. And so I opt for explaining one small amount really well in a lot of detail, you know, like explaining it, you know, in the reduced vocabulary or whatever needed, or with the definitions, rather than trying to cover everything in the article. Because you'll put the citation at the bottom. If they're curious, they'll go and see the article and read more about it. But, you know, you want to keep the story flowing and not kind of almost stop your reader halfway through with too much technical jargon and like the 40 different measures that they took or something like that.
Yeah, I would say my workflow is generally like write the key story, elaborate anything that needs to be elaborated, and then cut anything that I can cut.
Thank you.
Does anyone else have questions? Then I'll ask another one in our remaining few minutes. I was wondering, I mean, this might be like specific and somewhat personally motivated by something that me and someone else on this call are going through right now. How have you, so I guess this is kind of also maybe like a not very informed question, but do you always like, I think Caitlin, you were talking about how sometimes editors or someone will come to you with like a request for something, but otherwise, do you always pitch the story yourself that you want to work on? Or is it ever like Stephanie, when you were doing your mass media fellowship, like was it ever someone else being like, this is a really hot topic, or this is a really interesting topic that we want something around that? Or is it always you going to them with your either idea or like already written piece?
Yeah, so I would say it's usually you are pitching an idea to someone. It's like when I was at the LA Times, I was sort of more like on staff at that point. So I would still, there were like a number, we'd get basically like press releases from journals every day. And so I would go through that and see if there was anything cool, or my editor would screen through them and be like, oh, what are the new studies that are coming out? And then I would be like, oh, I'd like to write about this one this week. And so it was less pitching, more like, oh, that looks cool. And she'd be like, yeah, that looks cool too. Let's write about it. But that's more like when you're in like on staff somewhere. But like when I'm doing freelance stuff, I generally would pitch an idea. And so like the story I'm working on for Discover right now, it was a study I saw and I was like, oh, that could be cool. And so I wrote to the editor, I wrote like a full pitch, like, okay, like this is my idea. This is what they found in the study. This is why it's important. This is why readers of Discover would like it. And then like, here's my like experience and why I'm the person to write it. And then I'd send that to them. And then usually editors will come back with questions just to clarify the idea. And then that's sort of how you would get like your story. Like if you want to write for Discover or you want to write for Quantum Magazine or something like that. But yeah.
That's really helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Yeah. I was just going to add that this might be obvious advice, but it's always good to pitch to a person rather than like the publication itself. So it can be good to do some detective work and find the editor who is most relevant to your pitch and write them specifically.
That's really helpful. Thank you. I think we can end it here because I don't want to keep people over. If anyone has any more questions, they could stay on for a few more minutes, but otherwise, thank you guys so much for coming. I mean, personally, that was really, really helpful and it was a nice range of perspectives. So thank you guys so much for that. Thank you everyone for coming and have a good rest of your week.
Thanks for having us.